Hi again. Let me tell you a little bit about data binding. So we already saw about that in a previous example, but let me give you a more advanced version of it that would allow you to build an application like this. So what you have in here is a visualization that uses the same Palmer Penguins dataset. And then it allows you to create a scatter plot where you can select what is the x-axis. You can also select what is the y-axis. And then you have these nice animations. And then you can also say, I only want to see this number of points. And then start showing them and adding them dynamically to your chart. So the way this works, it's very similar to what we did before. In this case, we are using here is our G, where we are going to be drawing stuff. We created an SVG. We selected that with D3, and then we added things for the x-axis and for the y-axis. Okay. Then I do have an update function in here that goes and selects that target. In this case, is this one in here. And then I actually have to separate them into two cells such that, every time I rerun this, it doesn't create a new one, and therefore I will lose all the animations. So usually this is kind of like my best strategy as of now for producing animations on Observable. What I do in there is just drawing the axis, as you can see in here. Remember that that's very simple. You just need to have a G. In this case, it's called x-axis and y-axis, and then you just call D3 axis bottom, left, or whatever you want to use. But the key part in here that I wanted to show you is this area. So basically what I'm doing in here is that I'm selecting all the rows, and then I'm saying, show me all the rows, all to them, whatever it's selected, the maximum in the slider. And then I'm going to be doing join. And in this case, I'm actually creating three groups. One is enter, the other is update, and the other one is exit. The key for differentiating them is that notice how this one is actually filling everything with red. This one is filling everything with blue. And the other one is filling everything with gray, and then is disappearing with an opacity of 0. So you can see them at work when I actually move this thing. So when I make it smaller, then you can see that it's actually getting gray, and then they disappear. When I go bigger, then you can see that they actually appear in red, and then they switch to blue. So the whole idea with data binding is that not only you are taking your elements in your SVG and you're binding them with whatever data points you have. So every time I move this slider, I'm telling the visualization there is new data. So it's going to check the previous data, and then whatever it's remaining, it's going to add them. And those are the ones that are being added as red points. Okay. The same, and that's what goes into the enter group. The ones that go into the update are the ones that are already there. And actually those are more evident when I move something like this. I'm changing the visualization, but those dots were already there, so they will remain in the update. So when I did that, nothing got into the enter, nothing got into exit. It was just movement, okay? So the exit is the ones that nodes that need to be removed. So if I have more nodes and then I say, no, I want less, then basically those are the ones that need to be removed. And when you're creating visualizations with D3, you actually can control each one of those separately. So the way that you can do that, it's basically, instead of passing just join and saying what you want to join by, or like the actual element you want to create, like circle, it will be the case in here, this one. You can separate that into enter, update, and exit. I do recommend you searching for this observable notebook by my Bostock and reading it through. It should help you understand that you go from something like this when you're just joining text, and then you start adding more elements. So you can say, I want to change these attributes, but then you can start controlling the enter and the update, and then you can start controlling enter, update, and exit. Okay, so take a look at that. It's quite powerful. Now, if you want to get deeper into this, so you can stay, and then I'm going to show you how I build this from scratch. Hopefully I will not fail. But if you're not that interested in D3, maybe you can skip this part because this is going to be a little long. Let's see how we go. So let me create a new one Let's say that this is going to be called D3 data binding. And then the first thing you need to do is require D3. Remember that we are going to be working with D3 version 6, so let's put it like that. Then I need my data. So I usually like doing that, getting that from Vega data sets, which is a nice npm package, Vega, no Vago, Vega, and that's data sets in here. And then we are using version 2. When you get that, actually in Vega datasets, it's going to be an object that contains all of these datasets. So let's use the Palmer. I think it's just penguins there. Yes, penguins. So since that has a dot, then we actually have to access that like this. And then you just you call it because it's a function. And I think that goes and downloads it from, I don't know where, but it downloads it. So now that we have this, we can start creating our chart. The regular way of doing that is that you say something like chart, and then you can create it like either using D3. You have to have something to draw. So the typical way of doing that is you just say, like for instance, I'm going to create an SVG, and then you say I'm going to create it an SVG like this. And then if you're doing it that way, then you need to make sure to return the node, because this is going to be an SVG selection, and this is going to have our element, HTML element. Something else that I have seen Mike and everyone in D3 doing recently is changing the view box, and this is quite clever because it makes the whole chart like fluid. So when I do something like this, I have to make sure that I have a height. So let's say that in this case, this is going to be like 400 or something like this. And then now I have a chart. Now, the other way I like to show you, because this is not the only one, and the other way seems a little bit easier to understand in my opinion, is that you can create the target apart. So remember that in Observable, you can use this literal or this template, I don't know how they call it, to actually write HTML. So I can actually write here an SVG. And then instead of calling D3 create, I can actually select, or I can instead select target. So now I have that. Now, if I want to start drawing my stuff, then the key here is first to create my G for drawing. And then that is going to be just appending a G in here, and then we want to do the typical trick of doing a transformation in here. Oop, if you can spell right, and then you say translate. And basically what I want is to translate these to leaves and margins, so I can actually draw my axis. So this is going to be to my margin left, and here is going to be with my margin top, because the other one is for the X position and there is the Y. So I can do it like this. And then I start drawing on that G. However, I haven't created my margin, so let's define it. Remember that in Observable, when you want to assign an object to a cell, you have to put it into parentheses, because the curly brackets are already reserved for creating functions or starting to write code, I think. So basically in here, we need to have like a margin left. This might be a little bit bigger. We can have a margin top. This can be small. Bottom, we need a little bit more space in there, and right. And for the moment, this can be small. And notice that compared to the previous version, I'm actually putting these separate, because now, since I'm only going to have a one chart, it's actually useful to have it this way, so someone else can import this notebook and then override any of these parameters. Whereas if you have it inside, there's no way of doing that. Okay, so now I have that. Now this is creating that, and then I can start drawing my data. So usually what you will do in there is that you take this element and then you say, I'm going to select all, like let's say I'm going to select all the rows. I'm selecting by class, and actually I recommend you doing it that way instead of saying select circle, because like many times you're going to get into books whenever you already have circles for something else. So after that, you do the data binding. So when you do the data binding, basically what you're saying, and this is kind of like an oxymoron, is like selecting all the rows and then do data binding and then join with circle. And then when you do that, then you're going to start creating like a circle element for each one of your data points. So if you actually look here into the code, then now you can see that we do have a circle for each element. It's not showing up because we are not changing everything yet. So this is really weird for me. Like you select like an empty selection and then you do data binding. And what that does is that it's telling D3, okay, search for these things. If you find any, good. If not, then just put circles for me. And then you are going to have one for each data point. In this case, you can go and count them if you want, but there should be 344. So then we can start changing attributes for this. So for instance, we can say that the radius for this is going to be 5. Now we have some dots. And then you can start saying, you know what, let's change the CX too. And let's put this in a position, and I actually want to make this, like for instance, let's say that I want to start with just 50, and then all of my dots are going to be in the same position. I could, but I want actually to list for these things to be moving on the screen depending on the data. So the way of doing that is that you can say, you know what, I am going to take an accessor function, and then from that data element, I'm going to extract, and then you have to use whatever attributes you have in there, in here. So these ones are quite interesting because they have spaces and parentheses. That's kind of like a drawback from this one, but you could just put it like this. And then that will be drawing like the big length, and then you can just repeat the same thing with this, and then say, for instance, that I want to do the big depth. So if you do something like that, then you're going to get it like this, and then now your dots are starting to move. But remember, they're just in there because when you actually look at the values for those things, these are like 18.7 and 39, so it's going to be placed in that pixel, 18 pixels. So instead of doing that, what you want to do is that you want to create an X scale that is going to be a D3 scale linear. And then this thing needs two things. It needs a domain and it needs a range. And each one of those things is going to be just two numbers. So you can start by saying that this is going to go from 0 to 40. And then in the range, I want to go from 0 to the width minus the margin left minus the margin right. That is kind of like the actual effective space that I have for drawing. So notice that after Prettier cleans everything up for me, that I am passing two parameters in here, like an array with two elements. And then just by doing that, I can change this one and then make it so that I'm actually going to pass that through there. And then now it's distributed. Now the problem is that I under calculated, and then it's actually going further than what I expected. So we can start doing some things, like instead of using this specific value, we can let D3 recalculate that. So for doing that, I'm actually going to do an extra step, and is that I want to be able to select this. So I'm going to say, let's create an attribute like a variable, and then let's do the same one for this. So y attribute, and we are going to use this in a minute. Y attribute. And then from here, then what you want to do is that you want this domain to be computed in terms of the data. So you can use like either just the max and the min, and then say, I want to compute the maximum on the data, but you have to do on what? So actually I want to do that on my X attribute, right? So basically I'm not calling this function, I'm passing that function to D3. D3 is going to be calling it for each data element, and then it's going to return what is the maximum. You can actually come in here and say, show me the domain, and then this is telling you this is the maximum value in there. Now, a nice feature that you can do is that you can actually do nice values in there. When you create a nice scale, what it does is that it goes from that exact value into something that it's better for ticks and all of that. So I recommend you using nice on this. So that is nice, but you can actually, instead of saying from 0 to the maximum, you can also say, you know what, I don't want to start on 0, I just want the full extent. So if you wanted to compute the max and the minimum, you can do it like this. Now I have this. So I can actually replicate that for my Y scale. And then the only thing I need to change in here is this is going to be my Y attribute. And then I'm going to purposefully, I don't know if that's the proper way of saying that. I'm going to insert here a book, and I'm going to show you that in a minute, what that is. So I now have an X scale, I have a Y scale. So now I can just, like if you take a look how the chart looks now, it's distributing nicely on X, but not on Y. This is because I'm not passing my Y scale yet for this. So now I have this thing. If you don't want to see this that ugly, so you can change the style, so you can move the fill, and then say these are all going to be still blue. Okay, so if you see Mike Bostock's examples, he have been using attribute fill. I don't really understand why, but actually prefer this way, because when you actually select, when you create your style, this is a better way of, is the only way that has worked for me of overriding the CSS if you're changing the color on CSS. So this will be the basic one. If you want to make this better, like one of the things you can do that you should do, it's adding axes, right? So the way of doing that, it's like you take your grouping and then you just append a new grouping, and then you call, and basically what this will do is that it will take a parameter as parameter in a function, and then it's going to pass whatever selection you created in here, that is the x-axis that we just created. So we can say this is going to have x-axis as the class, and then the key in here is just saying, you know what, I am going to pass an axis bottom that is based on my x scale. And then you can also say, I am going to pass the same for Y. So let's do it like this. And then Y axis, and then the same for Y, but in this case, you actually want this to be on the left. So you put it like this. So a couple things there to fix. Like the first one, usually you want this on the bottom. So a trick that you can do for that is just something very similar to this. So you just want to translate the code. So let's change the attribute translate. And then in this case, you want to translate it like on X, it was perfect. So you don't need to move it much in X. But on Y, you want to, so this one can be 0. So since it's already 0, you don't need to compute anything. And then on Y, you want to use like the full effective size of the chart. That is going to be height minus margin bottom, margin top. Come on, right bottom. And then you get that. And the other thing is the bug that I mentioned. That is that this thing, if you see it starting from the top to the bottom, because that's how you actually write on SVG. Like actually the coordinate 0, 0 is around here. And then on top of that, your scale is going from 0 to height. So actually the small values are going to get small pixels, and the small pixels are in there. So are on the top. So one way of fixing this is a very neat trick. And when you actually use scales, like this is the type of functionalities that you can create very easily. So if you just flip the things, and what I did in there is changing the range, then you say instead of going from 0 to height, you go from height to 0. And then basically what that does is that it flips things. Like high values on the domain are going to get low values on the scale that are actually going to be on the top, and the opposite as well. So now you have a scatter plot, and that's nice. But now you want to start using an enter, update, and exit. So for that, we can do a couple tricks. So like the first one I want to do is that I want to be able to change these things. So for that, let me first put them in here, and then I can do the same one with this. So I actually like seeing these things on the top, so people know that they can change them. So you can go and write your own control, but a typical thing that you do on Observable, it's import from Jeremy, I think it's Jeremy Ashkenaz, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, the typical library for inputs. So we are going to use two. One, it's called select, and the other one is called slider. And then I'm going to go from G Ashkenaz /inputs. So after you take a while of working in Observable, you learn these things by memory. And then this is really cool because the only thing you need to do is pass what are the different options. So I'm going to use something really ugly, but that has worked for me. I'm going to put it next to the data. It means that I want to get all the possible quantitative attributes that I have on the data. So in this case, I'm going to call it first, let's get the attributes. So this is just going to get object keys of the data sub 0. And then this requires that data has a position 0. If data is nothing, then everything is going to fail. So hopefully you can forgive me for that. And then let's create the quantitative ones. So in this case, it's going to be the attributes, but then filter by whenever, and this is going to be an attribute, so let's call it A. Whenever data sub 0 sub A, I like one way of getting this is the type of this. It's equals number. This is going to fail if your data contains null values in the first thing, but let's forget about that for a second, or ignore that for a second. And then the other one I want to create is the categoricals. Although in this example I'm not really going to use it, so it's the opposite. So the nice thing about that is that now you can come in here and then you can say, you know what, instead of passing this specific one, I just want to create a selector with the whatever quantitatives we have. And then the problem is that now that you change this is not working because this is actually returning. If you take a look at the value of X attribute, it's an HTML element. So what you want to do is that you actually want to do a view of this. When you do that, then it's a very nice trick in Observable. Like the cell itself is going to return the element, so you can actually see the input, but the value of this, or the actual value of the variable, is going to be whatever you select. So now I can do these tricks and then actually see things moving. Okay, so let's do the same one with this one. So it's basically the same thing. Let's say view of this, and then just select quantitatives. And then we have the two elements. We can collapse, like unpin these two, so actually they're more readable. And if you actually want to see a title in there, you can do something like this, and then say the title is going to be, this is my Y attribute, and then don't forget to close the object. And then I think it's faster just to do it this way, X attribute, and this is my X attribute. And by default, they're going to select the same one. So if you don't want that to happen, let's say that this one is going to be whatever quantitative attribute you have on the position 1. So once more, this is assuming that you have more than one quantitative. So at least please provide me 2 numbers. If not, how can I create a scatter plot? So now you have this chart. It's very nice. You can change things. But it doesn't have the nice animation. So you can say, hey, John, you are like not really delivering what you promise. So for doing that, like the first step that you need to do, and if you have ideas, let me know. But one way you can do that is like, let's separate this. So I could take this target and then I can put it on a different cell. So remember, the way Observable work is that it executes things by topological order. So if I leave this inside the way it was before, every time this cell re-executes, and this cell is re-executing chart, is re-executing every time categoricals, or can I see that here? Like this one is re-executing every time any of these ones change, I think. So if X attribute change, then it re-executes. If Y attribute change, it re-executes because it needs it. So when I move this, it's going to re-execute. So when the target was inside, when I changed that, it actually recreated the chart and then it shows it nicely. But now you can see that when I do that, it's actually putting things on top of that. And the reason for that is that if you actually go and check on the code, when you inspect the DOM that is being selected, you can see that here is my SVG, and then inside that SVG, instead of having one drawing G drawing, I have 3, and I created 1 for each time it executed. And that makes sense, because if you see here, it's actually appending every time. So you don't want append, you want the appending being done just once. So we need to get this out of here. So let's do that by doing this. Then let's put that in here and then say this is going to be my target. And of course I missed an equal in there, and then I'm going to return my target, and then I'm going to put these elements in here. So now this cell doesn't depend on, well, it is depending because I'm using this. And then if I want to do this thing, then I need to do a const svg equals d3. So I guess this one, I guess it will be better just to put it in here. Excuse me. So now when I have this, basically what's happening in there is that I created the SVG, and then I'm generating these elements. Now this target is working, the other one here is not working, but this thing is generating what we want. And then what we could do is that we are missing this variable now. So one way of getting to that variable is that we can just take the target, that is the element, the HTML element, that is this one, that is returning this one, because that's what we are returning here and it's being saved in here. And then I can select from that, like say G drawing. So I just need to make sure that this thing exists in here. So I just need to call this class G drawing. And I'm sure Mike Boster will have a better way of doing this, but I'm not Mike, so sorry about that. And then the only thing missing here is, like, this cell actually doesn't need to do anything. I can just say this is going to be my update cell, and that's important in case you want to redraw this, and then actually let's call this chart, so we can follow Mike's or Observable's maybe standard of having your chart being named chart, so people can know where to get it when they import it from you. So when you have this, now you have this part, and then you can change these things, and then it's actually working nicely. Let's see if this one in here, it's I want to see like what are the elements that this one is depending on. Oh, it's interesting, it wasn't redrawing, maybe there was a book. So chart now it's depending on update, but it's also depending on X and Y and margin and height. So that's why it's redrawing those things. So one of the things is that I actually don't want this to depend on this, and that's actually going to screw up my animations. So let's see if we can leave it in here. Yeah, probably I don't want this, but let me fail on that so I can show you later what's happening. So what I want to start doing is that I want to start controlling the what's happening. Like the first thing I want to do is that I want, whenever I get a new data point, I want to color code that as red. So for doing that, the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a max n or whatever, and then this is going to be a slider that has a minimum value of 0, a maximum value of whatever data elements that we have. It's going to have a value of 10. That's the starting one. It's going to step every 10, and that's the reason for that, and a title of max records. Hoping I'm not spelling in anything. And then that gives me a max n attribute that I can use in here for slicing this data from 0 to the max n. Okay, so when I do that now, when I create these things, it actually should be recreating that, and it might not be doing that because I need to restart this. But now if I do it like this, at least, now you can see it's creating this, but then every time I move it, then it starts adding them up. And when I remove it, it's actually not removing that. So there might be something wrong in there. Maybe it's, so let's take a look at what's the code doing. Let's inspect this. So I do have my SVG, and then I have my G drawing in here, and still has all of the elements, my axis. So interesting. Oh yes, so this is a great one. So basically One of the problems is that remember that I was selecting all the rows. So I'm adding those elements, but it's not finding them because I'm just joining by circle. So like the elements don't have the class row. So I have to add that class. And hopefully this will fix that. So let's restart this so we can start from scratch. And then that's what I wanted to see. Okay, so now I have that. I also have that these things change. And now I want to see, let's start by adding the colors. So you can see that things get in a different color when they remove. Because the thing is that if I say I want to change things to red, then everything is going to be red. And it doesn't matter, I only want red to be used for the new ones. And actually red is too red. But anyhow, so let's say that we leave this as a still blue. So what you can start doing is that, say, instead of joining by circle, you can start passing the enter, update, and exit. Remember, enter are the ones that need to be created. So you need to pass a function in here. One of the keys of this function for this to work, and that I learned that the hard way, is that you need to return that enter. So if you don't return this enter, then it's not going to know what to do with that. So I'm actually going to put this here. And then when you are handling this manually, you are actually going to be the one creating or appending the element. So I need to append the circle, and then you assign in here all of the things you want this thing to do when things are created. And then one of the most important things is to spell things properly. So when you do that, now you can come in here and say, you know what, this is going to have a style that changes the field to be red. Let's leave it like with that bright red, just because it's easier to write. So when you do that, then now you can see that it's not working. And then compare document position is not a function. Interesting. I am putting this aligned in here. Oh, maybe it's because I'm not passing the, yeah, but no, that shouldn't be the case. Let's see, this is easier when you have the students next to you. So this should be like that. And let's try now. So still not creating the new ones. Let's redraw this and call this once more. Interesting. So it's like, so for the moment, let's remove this just to see if this will draw them as red. Yes, so I do have an error in here. I have no idea what it is. The way I implemented it in the other one I show you was something like this, but that shouldn't be the error. I'm changing the class, so that shouldn't be the error either. So interesting. Can that be the problem? But I return enter. Oh, that's the case. Yes, I know what was my error. So yeah, that's a tricky one. So what I was returning is the enter, and this enter doesn't have anything. So actually this is a selection that is empty. What you should return is the appended circle. So you should be returning something like this. Good. Lucky me, I noticed that. So now I have this. Now I have things creating and removed. Now I can start controlling what I want for things getting in. So I can actually say this is going to be, I want them to be red when they come in. And then you can see now they're red when they enter. And then the remaining, this is actually going to apply to everyone. So if you actually leave this in here, probably they are not going to get red error, because it's whatever you leave outside is going to be applying for everyone. Like for instance, the radio 5, you can change that in there, or you can just put it in the top and in the enter and then just leave it in there. Okay, so I'm actually going to comment this out because I only want it on the update. But for the moment, let's do it this way, just because it's let's code. And then I don't need this one. So join will take three parameters, and those are three functions. So that's going to be my enter, Let's do now my update. And the update is going to receive like the selection that contains the update. This one actually already has circles because those are the ones that already exist. So now I can say for the ones that are updating, I want them to be blue, okay? So now I have that, and then if I go in here, now they're blue. And when I create them, they get red. And then you notice how the only ones that are staying red are the ones that the last, and that's why I put this step to be everything. Because like, since this thing is making that cell changing a lot, then it's only keeping the ones that, I mean, what it's doing is that, for instance, let's say I'm going here in 290. So everything is blue now. If I go to the next one, when I start dragging, it goes to 300, and then those will get red. But if I go then to 310, then the ones that were between 290 to 300 now become blue. Does that make sense? So it's different, for instance, if you just jump all the way, then all of these are going to get red. I hope that makes sense. Now, you can do exactly the same thing, like the default behavior. If you only provide the enter and the update, the default behavior for the exit is just for remove things. So in the exit, you actually just say exit.remove, something like this. And then it's just going to get rid of them. But you could also say, you know what, I actually want to get these things to color gray. And then just by doing that, they're actually not going to get removed. So now they're getting gray, but you still want to get rid of them. So I didn't want to explain transitions by now, but this kind of forced my hand because I don't think there's other way of doing this. So if you take a look at this observable that I told you, Mike uses a clever technique that I really liked, that is the following. So you can actually do something like this. You can say, let's call on this selection. What call does, again, is that it's going to call the function that you pass inside. So I can say, I'm also going to call it exit. And then on exit, I'm going to start a transition with a duration of a second. And then on that transition, I'm going to still change the style to an opacity of 0. So basically it's going to transition from an opacity of 1, that is the default, to an opacity of 0. So it's going to fade away. And once it finishes, then it's going to remove the nodes. So then you have to make sure that you're closing all of your things. Transition is not a function. And then you always have to make sure that you spell things right. So now when you have this, then when you go down, they disappear. So that's what you hear. The problem of doing this on streaming is that I don't hear anyone clapping back. Anyhow, so yeah, at least I was very happy the first time it is run. Something else that it's important, and it's something that I also learned by sending some code to suggestion codes for and reading Mike's code, is that instead of passing these, what you can do is that you can create a transition outside. And that's actually useful for making sure that all of your things are going to be in the same transition. So you can actually do something like this. So this is going to create a transition. And then if you see, Mike, I think, does it like this. So this creates like a name. And then, of course, you have to spell that. Transition, no, transition. And then in here, instead of setting the duration and everything, you just say, this is going to be my transition. And then you say, what is the name of that? And then we are going to reuse that transition in some other places so that you can make it such that the transition is the same transition for the enter and the exit. So now we have this. To recap, we added an enter, update, and exit. Each one of these is going to receive a selection. The enter one is the weird one because at the beginning it's going to receive a selection that doesn't contain the circles. So I need to append the circles and then change whatever I want to change inside. And then change on the things entering or things being created. The update are the ones that are being updated. In this case, I'm just changing them to still blue. And finally, in the exit, I am saying first, set them on gray. And then after that, do a transition that goes to 0 in the opacity, and then remove things. Something that you're going to need, and I know that because I built the previous one, is that you want these ones to have an opacity of 1. Because sometimes you can move your mouse faster than this thing disappearing. So they are just going to be idle in a lower opacity. Let's see if we can actually generate that book. So let's run that, and then something like this. Then I start the animation, and then I start the animation. Doesn't seem that I'm going to be able to catch it, but yeah. Anyhow, so that's still trust me on that, I guess. So now the other thing I want is that I don't want things to stay red when I add them. So I started getting fancy building this. So I say, well, why don't I just call the same thing in here? Then, and the reason why you're doing this with call instead of just doing dot transition is that when you create a transition out of a selection, it creates like handicap selection. It's a selection that doesn't contain all of the things that you want, and you want to return the full selection in here. So when you return the call, it's still going to return this selection, whereas allowing you to modify the selection inside. I don't know if that makes sense. So in here, I'm going to start also a transition. Hopefully this time I will write it nice, right? And then I'm just going to change the style of the fill to go to steel blue. So when you do that, hopefully we'll see here now, there we go. So I do have some reds, and then they switch to blue. And hopefully, would I get the error in here? Oh, oh, that's an interesting one. Like that. Oh, I think I know what that one is happening. Oh, interesting. I didn't get the other one. I guess it's because I'm sharing the transition now. So the first time I built it, I also did it creating a transition on each one of those, and then it was failing. So I guess just by having this, that's fixing. And I'm still hoping to get one book that I got really proud of. Well, if I don't, then the key in here is that whenever you're working on Observable, you have to make sure that you clean up things that happen whenever your cell changes faster than the animation. I don't know if that makes sense. So in validation, it's something that it's a promise, and then this is going to get called every time the cell needs cleanup. So in this case, I'm going to say I take these rows, I think is what I need to do. Save this in here. And then since my transition is working on those rows, then I just need to say terminate. If you take a look at the documentation on D3, here on D3 transition, oh, it's called interrupt. So terminate was on D3 version 3, I think. So it's something like this. And that is for, we are forcing the transition to finish every time the thing changes. So now hopefully this thing is working and it looks nice. You still have that tickle in there. I wonder why. But yeah, like for the moment I have this. Now the only problem that I have now is that when I move things in like this, and actually this is an interesting one. So when I move things like this, then you can see that they're actually disappearing and they are not moving. That's where I wanted to see the error. So if you want to think about this, look at this visualization in here that again, it seems to be showing as an error. But if you look at the chart is depending, it should be depending on X and Y. So you can see that in here, chart depends on X and Y. And X depends on X attribute and Y depends on Y attribute. So every time you're changing this cell is getting re-executed. And because of that, you get the tickle. So because of that, you shouldn't be doing this in here. Now we want to move this here to the updating part. And this is going to be tricky because like I don't have these G's that I created. But you can notice that I did add a class in there. So you can access them just by saying, taking this one and then select from this one my X axis. And then in there I can do this one and I can do the same one in here. so y-axis. And then when you do that, then now this one can go like this. And hopefully now, at least it doesn't it doesn't create things new. So now you can see they are not red, but I don't have the nice animation. And does the tickling goes away? Yes, now it looks way better. Oh, it still has some in there. Maybe it's the opacity, I don't know. That's a book that it's over my head right now. So the other thing I want to do is that it's usually a good idea saying what are the axis labels. So let's add something for that. So we can do that very nicely here. Since this G is a grouping, I can actually append inside a text. And then in there, I should add a class that is going to help me find it later. That is going to be my axis label. So I can put that in here. So basically kind of like my, oops, I put it in the wrong part. So this is for x-axis and this is going to be for y-axis. And then inside there, I'm going to want to change that to be the text. So since I'm not going to use that variable, so I can actually just say axis label here. And then I can say, on that one, please change the text to be X attribute. And you can do the same thing in here. And then they should be appearing in there. And I remember spending a lot of time wondering why it wasn't appearing. But then I realized that it's an SVG problem. And I just need to change the style of the text that I was drawing in there and say that it's going to have a text of black. And I'm also going to get another error, but at least it's showing now here because it's in the start of that element. So for instance, for the x-axis, I want to do a transformation. And then basically in here, I want to move this thing to the end of my chart. That is going to be width minus margin, and let's put a $sign in here so this thing auto-completes because I'm a complete dependent, how do you say that? Like this. And then on Y, I'm actually going to give it like 10 or something, maybe a little bit more, so maybe that's too much. That's perfect. And then I want this thing to be aligned to the right, so you can do that also with style, text, anchor, and if you're wondering how I know all of that, it's just by creating a lot of charts. So for this one, it's not that bad. It's still in there, but I'm not seeing the other part. So at the very least, you should put something like, for instance, on this one, it could be like middle. And then maybe move it a little bit to the top so it's not completely over the axis, something like this. So in this case, for X is going to be 0, and then for Y, it's going to be also manually set up. We actually have to go backwards. So it's going to be -10 or -20. So now we have those, and then too much. Let's do it in 10. So hopefully now when I change these things, then like change this one, for instance, you can see it changing here. Good, but I still want to see my animation. So the way of doing that, and the reason why it's like that, is because these things are being applied to all of the things that I create. So the way of fixing that is that I could move this and say that they should be set up when you start, and then you can also paste it in here. But instead of doing that, I don't want to repeat code, so I came up with this idea. You can create a move function. This move function is going to accept a selection, and then what it's going to do is to that selection is going to change these attributes. So basically this is a function that takes a selection as a parameter and then changes the X and the Y. And the beauty of doing it that way is that you can say something like call, and then you say move, and then do the same one in here. But doing that, at least fully, when I do that, they should appear in the other position, but I do want them to actually do that on a transition. So one way of doing that is that I can start, instead of calling this like this, I can, like directly in the selection, I can use the same transition that I was using before. And it seems I have issues with transgen. Like, I don't know, like that's kind of my secret password. Please don't try that on my account. And then I'm applying the same transition. And when I do that, voila, so now you have things moving. So basically that's what's happening in there. I wonder if I'm missing anything. So now you have things that when they appear, now you have this problem. So if you don't want things to start from there, the problem is that I'm applying the transition to all the move. So let's leave it like this. So for enter, I just need to call move. But for update, I want to call, for instance, I can say, I can take the update in here, and then I can say update.transition. You see how I call it right? And then call move to that. And hopefully that will do the trick. So I have this, they move nicely. These ones disappear, and the ones that appear where I want them. So I think that's everything I promised. Very quickly, the key of doing these things, it's especially, and this is something that only happens in Observable, is make sure that you have a cell that is creating your starting element, and it's keeping it that way, and that it doesn't depend on any of the variables that you're going to be changing, these ones. And then create an update cell, and in there you can handle your enter, update, and exit separately. Remember that these are the elements that are going to be created, these are the ones that need to be updated, and these are the ones that need to be removed. And I hope this makes sense, and thank you very much.